For people impacted by Texas's multi-billion-dollar human trafficking industry, justice can be elusive. This week on Inside the Investigation, KXAN's Jennifer Sanders explains the challenges prosecutors face in holding alleged traffickers accountable. Welcome to Inside the Investigation. I'm Kelly Wiley, and we're joined in the Investigates office today by Jennifer Sanders. Welcome in.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, no, I mean, I feel like obviously everyone watching knows who you are because you are the face of our station and you're out there anchoring every night. But I don't know that people know what a fantastic storyteller you are. And so I'm really excited for people to watch your story. And I got to read the script and it really was so moving. But let's talk about it. Because your story is about human trafficking and the difficulty around prosecuting those cases. What made you want to look into this at all?
Yeah. So probably about 2 years ago, there's a nonprofit I'm involved in, and one of our focuses is human trafficking. And so we had a few state representatives, well, actually there were representatives from state agencies come in and talk to us about it. And I said, man, there are a lot of gaps in this for a state that really touts being anti-human trafficking in terms of legislation and all of that. There are a lot of gaps here. It's kind of under-resourced. And so I went down a rabbit hole and said, I need to look into this and see if there's a story to be told here to really address some of those problems and come up with potential solutions. Yeah.
And I'm so curious because it's such a tough subject to report on. Because, I mean, the victims, they've already been through so much. Their families have been through so much. How did you even approach finding people to share with you what they've gone through?
And I'll back up even a little bit more. So when I realized this is a subject that I wanted to tackle, I started meeting with prosecutors, people just in the anti-human trafficking space. And they said, are you sure that you want to look into this? I said, I do. They said, you might be biting off more than you can chew. And so I said, okay. So I met with probably about, I would say 10 to 12 people in this space, advocates, prosecutors who focus specifically on human trafficking cases, as well as some victims. And I think what happened, where the shift was in making it easier for them to talk to me, was the fact that I had done really due diligence. This wasn't something that I just watched a movie or and so they trusted the fact that I was going to tell a comprehensive story, because a lot of them were hesitant to even talk to reporters because of I've shared my story before. And of course, maybe one or two sound bites is used and it doesn't really give a full picture of their experience and the complexities of human trafficking. So building that trust, I think, came from me just doing my due diligence, talking to, again, everyone who's in that space to make sure I understood. Because there are a lot of things I did not understand and that I'm still really learning as it relates to that space.
Okay, so your story looked at the challenges with finding justice for these victims. What did you learn as far as that goes? So
first of all, that is hard. It's very difficult. And when we talk about human trafficking, sometimes those who were trafficked, to the point you made earlier, sharing their story can be re-traumatizing. So they don't want to share their story. They might go talk to police, but then again, because they're being traumatized by telling their story, they might just back off. And so a lot of the cases that we even looked at, some of the charges were dismissed because they couldn't find the witness, disappeared. That's what it would say on the actual court document. And so some of the challenges that we found that prosecutors have, missing witnesses, it's such a hard crime to prove because sometimes the evidence just isn't there. So what they would do would be to focus on charges that are easier to prove. And sometimes those sentences don't really match the crime. And so, there are just a lot of challenges as it related to that in terms of missing witnesses, just the evidence, the charges. And one of the district attorneys that I talked to, he said, our staff really isn't trained that well as it relates to human trafficking. And so they have a solution, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But that's an issue that we found too in a lot of the district attorney's offices is, a lot of them are understaffed, they're under-resourced, and they haven't really tried a lot of these cases. So it's hard to build a case, yeah.
Reading your script, there was one parent in particular who had done a lot of advocacy just to make sure the case kept going. Tell me about that. I mean, it was a long time, it was several years before the case got to a point where there was a trial, right?
Yeah, well, the trial will be next year, 8 years later.
Wow.
8 years after her daughter's death. And so for her, she's explained to me, Mary Wells, she explained, I didn't even know what trafficking was. And she doesn't even know how her daughter got linked up with these people that are involved in the case, and I think a lot of that information will come out during trial. But for her, she had to educate herself on trafficking, and it's so remarkable how she's using really her pain to help others. So they established legislation, the Julia Wells Act, and it focuses on putting human trafficking education into driver's ed courses. And so for her, she said, I need to make every parent aware of this is something that could happen to your child. I think that, again, we see the movies and there's a lot of different narratives out there that just aren't true. And she wanted to really raise awareness about how this can happen to anyone.
That's so interesting that you say that it's been so long since this happened and she still has all these questions about like why her daughter, how she even knew these people.
Yeah, and and to be transparent, for her, she did tell me that some of the stuff she just did not want to know. And she knows that during trial it will come out, but she was really trying to just navigate the grief process, and I think a part of that was raising awareness and her advocacy work. But a lot of that trauma, again, will rise up during trial because she'll learn some more details that for years she said, I simply don't want to know that. Yeah.
From her perspective, what were the challenges that she noticed through the prosecution process?
Yeah, and that's a great question. For her, so COVID happened, so we got to be clear about that. But even prior to that, so all of this took place in 2018, she said, I just couldn't get a hold of anyone. I was calling the district attorney's office, and in the initial police report, it described Julia's death as an unexplained death. And so I think they were trying to figure out some more details and link some pieces. And this became part of a multi-year, multi-agency investigation. So there were just a lot of missing pieces that law enforcement, the DA's office was just trying to put together. But for her, she said, getting a hold of someone, she finally, one day the district attorney actually answered the phone. I guess his secretary wasn't there. I don't know the details surrounding that, but he actually answered the phone. And she said that's when the results started. And I think for her too, she had, I call her a justice navigator, an advocate who was in her corner who said, you need to keep calling. I know it's hard, I know it's tough, but you need to keep making those calls to the right people so that you can get an answer and ultimately get justice for Julia. Yeah.
Okay, so you said that there are some solutions that the district attorney that you're talking to was looking into, but maybe some broader solutions the state is looking at also. Tell us how the state is tackling this, because like you said, like we get press releases all the time talking about different ways, different funding that the state is trying to put behind solving this issue and helping. So what does that look like?
So it was really interesting because I thought in my research, I said, well, do we need more legislation, more training? And a lot of the experts I talked to, even the survivors, they said, we don't really need more legislation. Texas is leading when it comes to anti-trafficking legislation. What we need, though, is enforcement to make sure that these laws are being enforced and followed, whether it be by law enforcement or district attorney's offices. A solution that, well, I'll tackle the state piece first. I think that we saw in special session that there was human trafficking legislation that was anti-human trafficking legislation that was passed during the special session. So there are some laws on the book, a lot of laws on the books that really help in that space. But also, what has happened is, like in Dallas County, they created an anti-human trafficking office, and so that's helping them as well. But unfortunately, we don't have the resources to do that in every single DA's office. And I think that there's some state funding that's shifting more towards human trafficking that will really help address that issue and bolster some of the cases that are going there. There's a lot of trainings that the state does offer to law enforcement and DEA's offices. However, one of the experts I spoke to, he made a really good point in saying that there's not a one-size-fits-all training. Williamson County doesn't look like Dallas County, and so you have to really be nuanced when you think about training for human trafficking cases. You really have to be nuanced county by county to make sure that everyone knows, okay, what works here won't work here, won't work here. And so that's another one of the solutions that's in the works. But I think that there has to be, again, at the state level, just more training for these different law enforcement agencies and for DA's offices that's specific to their county. And that's what some of these people are advocating for.
So you said that's the state piece. Are there any other solutions that came up in your reporting?
Yeah, so the solution that I focus on in my reporting is with Williamson County. So they have this new multi-year partnership with the Human Trafficking Institute. And what's unique about them is they really have this global perspective. Tyler Dunman, he is one of their VPs there at that agency. He lived in Africa probably for about 6 years, and his work was solely focusing on working with prosecutors to help bolster prosecution rates in Africa and help them build cases. And so you think about there, he was talking about the limited resources here, so to be able to come over to the States and implement that same type of program will likely be a little more successful because we do have access to more resources. So they're working with the Williamson County DA's office for a 3-year partnership. And what they're doing is looking at, okay, what are the gaps? Let's identify the gaps. Let's track the data, because that's a whole other issue. But their data collection is not good surrounding human trafficking. And if you can't track, then you can't
really solve anything.
Exactly.
You don't even know where to start.
You don't know where to start. Yeah. So they're really working on data collection as well as identifying the gaps. And then from there, okay, so we know that piece. Now we know how to create and tailor really a training program for these prosecutors and help them work with law enforcement sooner to build stronger cases to prosecute under Chapter 20A, which is the statute here in Texas.
Well, whenever I finish an investigation, there's always like 15 more that I want to do afterwards. There's always something else that comes up that you're like, oh, I think I need to look more here.
Yeah.
What questions do you still have? Is there anything that after finishing this investigation that you're like, I want to keep going on this?
Yeah, I think really and truly focusing on data collection, because that is really problematic. And we see that in our jobs. If we can't, we submitted several public information requests, and we did that to a few different agencies. And sometimes we would look at the data from this agency and then look here and things weren't matching. And so if there is just a centralized hub where this data is kept, and even one of the survivors said that that's something that needs to happen, because that way you can go to that hub and see, okay, what are the trends, the issues, and that will better help address tackling these cases. So data collection is something that I would definitely focus on. And, are we moving into a space as a state where we're looking to have a more centralized hub to have all of that data? And
Well, no, finish.
Okay. And then secondly, I would say just resources, because and this is separate of the story that I did, but as I was talking to a lot of people in the advocacy space, an issue that they were running into was, they provide emergency housing or housing for probably like 2 or 3 years for human trafficking survivors / victims. And for them, they said, we simply don't have the space You know, and a lot of that is tied to funding, but it's such a prevalent issue that's really hidden and not talked about. Sometimes people don't know where to seek help, but as we're talking about it more and raising awareness about it more, you're seeing more people come forward to seek help, and they're like, we need more space, we need more resources to ensure that we get them to a point where they don't have to go back, or they don't even want to go back into this.
And it's not even, I would imagine, just space in a situation where you're maybe coming out of a human trafficking situation. It would need to be a place where they're safe, where people don't know where they are, and where they can do the healing and get the resources that they need away from harm.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's just, and when I say space, it's a place that has a lot of resources for them to prevent them from going back into that situation or being pulled back into that situation. Yeah. So counseling and all that.
Oh my goodness. Well, Jennifer, I'm glad that you tackled this, and I'm glad that you bit off more than you could chew. And you tackled this because it seems like it's an important thing that you're talking about. If you haven't watched Jennifer's story, you can find it now on KXAN.com or on our KXAN Plus app. Thank you so much for joining us, and please come back for another episode of Inside the Investigation.